Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto blocked Sasuke's curse mark. Mid-Chuunin exams on. Orochimaru fails to seal the Kyuubi's chakra in the Forest of Death. Naruto interferes with Sasuke's curse mark. And what's wrong with the Hokage? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Prologue. There was a roaring in his ears as he sprinted through the trees. Maybe it was the rushing wind, or the blood thrumming in his veins, or the loud pounding of his heart. Whatever it was, he didn't care. Those freaky giant snakes had led him far away from Sakura-chan, Sasuke team, and that freaky Kusanine. Now that the snakes were history, he needed to get back before the fight was over. He needed to show Sasuke team that he was no baby, and he needed to kick that nasty Kusanine into next week. Baring his teeth in a wild grimace, he burst out into a small clearing. Sakura-chan. She was kneeling down on the ground. Sasuke team was slumped limp and dead-looking in her arms. The Kusanine was nowhere in sight, but Shikigich could be anywhere, just waiting to strike. Naruto rushed down the tree trunk, high on adrenaline and feeling wired. Sakura-chan. What's wrong with Sa-ai? Stay away. The pink-haired girl squeaked, brandishing one of her kunai as tears leaked from her green eyes. Ha? Sakura-chan? Naruto hesitated, frowning in confusion. What are you doing? It's just me. That's a horrible henge. Sakura snapped. No way that I'll believe you're Naruto. Naruto. He raised his hand to try and calm her. Wah? His mouth snapped shut when he caught sight of the back of his hand. His fingernails were pointed and claw-like. Checking his other hand, he found the same thing. Swallowing hard, his tongue brushed against his teeth, and he found that he had fangs. Shock cooled the fire in his veins. His nails started to melt back into their usual bluntness and he felt kind of tired. Clenching his jaw, he grasped at the fading fire he felt prickling under his skin. That Kusanine could be anywhere. It's not safe. I still need that chakra. There was a rumbling growl in the back of his mind and he shivered. That Nin took out Sasuke with his fancy eyes. I'll need everything I've got. He heard another snarl, but the fire in his veins flared up a bit, and his nails solidified into claws again. Okay. Sakura-chan, seriously, it's me. He protested, returning his focus to his female teammate. I did this before, on the bridge in Wave against Haku. You just didn't see it because of all the ice and mist, I swear. That's how I beat him after Sasuke got all full of needles. The girl blinked and half-lowered her weapon. Naruto? Of course. Naruto snorted and moved his hands into position to start a particular jutsu. I'll even prove it. If you do that stupid henge, I'll pound you. Sakura snapped, glaring. Okay, the blonde hurriedly agreed and dropped his hands. He scampered over to Sasuke's side and frowned when he heard the Uchiha's labored breathing. What's wrong with team? I don't know, Sakura sniffed. That grass ninja did something to him. It bit his neck. She shifted the boy in her arms so that Naruto could see a strange black mark on the Uchiha's neck. It hurt him, Sasuke-kun screamed like he was dying. And now, he won't wake up. She sniffled. It feels like he's getting a fever. Naruto frowned at the mark, 3 fat comma-like marks that swirled around each other, and kind of reminded him of the tomos of the Sharingan. He reached out and touched it with his finger experimentally. It felt cold and slimy and prickly and all kinds of bad news. A hissing growl between his ears reinforced his conclusion that the freaky hickey was evil. What is it? I have no idea. Sakura snapped. Well, you're the smartest one next to Sasuke team, Naruto shrugged helplessly. The pink-haired genin swallowed hard. It's something advanced, whatever it is. Some kind of seal, maybe? Naruto squinted at the mark. A seal? Seals were tricky, complicated things. They were markings made up of formulas of symbols that were merged together through the careful introduction of chakra. They stored things into scrolls, locked doors, soundproofed rooms, set off explosions, the list went on and on. If a ninja was knowledgeable enough about seals, they could do just about anything with them. Naruto barely knew more than the average newly minted genin did about seals. He could use exploding tags, letter bombs, and get things out of, and back into, storage scrolls. And then there was, the thing he'd read about in that book. He'd found an advanced book on seals under his mom's bed when he was 8. Most of the stuff in it went completely over his head, except for one simple technique. It was an emergency seal-breaking jutsu, only to be used in emergencies. This is definitely an emergency. Naruto molded his clawed hands into the dragon seal, the tiger, the snake, and then the ram. It can't hurt to try, right? Clenching his teeth, he jabbed his index and middle finger into the black mark and shoved the molded red chakra into it. Please let this work. Chapter 1. Broken Mind. The Hokage stood on one of the observation catwalks in the fighting arena hidden at the heart of the massive Forest of Death training field and did his best to pay full attention to the fights unfolding beneath him. The genin who had made it through the dangerous, ancient forest course within the time limit and with the required scrolls were being weeded out in this preliminary tournament that led to the third and final exam, the individual fighting tournament in front of civilians, dignitaries, local and foreign, and other ninja, local and foreign. In that round he was one of the judges and his opinions carried a lot of weight. It was best to really observe all the Chuunin candidates now and see how much they progressed over the month they'd have to train before the final part of the exam to better gauge their potential. I really shouldn't be a judge, though, he reflected. I don't have any experiences of my own to compare to what I see them do. Even after observing previous exams, it's so hard to tell apart the varying skill levels of such young, inexperienced fighters, for me, anyway. At least there is the official proctor and other jounin observers to make up for me. The matches were brutal, some exceptionally so. It pained him to watch children try to kill each other so savagely. They should still be in school, studying to be doctors, lawyers, scientists, or farmers. They should be playing with their friends, saving up their allowance to buy that one special thing that they desired, falling in love for the first time. They shouldn't be little killers with blood on their hands. But it had to be this way, he'd been told. Such soft childhoods were for civilians. To be secure and prosper, a hidden village must have ninja, and the sooner one becomes a ninja the better. That was the truth in the world in which he lived. It made him sick inside. He wanted so desperately to change it. But the leaders of the other villages didn't feel the same way. To keep his village from being crippled and at disadvantage, the best he could do for the children was to raise the minimum age requirements for admission to and graduation from the Ninja Academy by a few years. It wasn't nearly enough, but a few more years of innocence was better than none at all. They all say that I wanted this job, he thought glumly. They said I'd be protecting the village as Hokage. But it seems like most of what I do is send people to die, or send them to kill. What kind of person must I have been to want such a position? One with a good heart and a strong soul, she would tell him. It takes a strong man to do what needs to be done, and a good man to make sure that what is done is right. Or at least that's what he thought she'd say if she were here to hear his doubts. She'd probably find a blunter way to say it, a less flowery way. His assistant preferred speaking her mind to beating around the bush most of the time. Her honest opinions were refreshing in the shadowy world of ninjas and politics. But for all her honesty and loyalty, there were always doubts. Danzu, an ANBU veteran and a leader of part of that shadowy organization, openly despised the Hokage's assistant. The crippled man warned the Hokage that she could abuse the prestige and trust granted by her position in his administration. She could manipulate him into pursuing her personal agenda and decide things in her favor. She could even seduce him and further her influence over him. The woman was a foreigner and former foreign ninja, and Danzu wouldn't put anything past her. His assistant, however, didn't seem the type to do any of the things that Danzu liked to insinuate. She never flaunted her position, she never sought favors, she disdained politics in general, and she'd certainly never made any attempt to seduce him. Although if she would seduce him, he wouldn't. Bad thoughts. He swallowed hard and mentally kicked himself. I can't think that way about her, I'm her boss. And besides, she has a son. Speaking of her son, the boy was being pitted against an Inuzuka boy and his puppy. He struggled not to smile as the blonde genin marched down the stairs to the arena floor, eager to face down his feral-looking opponent. It was even harder to keep from smiling as he recalled the story behind the boy's current outfit. While shopping, the boy had fallen in love with what had later been described to him as an orange "I'm over here please stab me" outfit. His mother refused to buy it and had to threaten to ground him to get him to pick out something else. The boy had sulkily settled on mostly black attire with orange sleeves and had pouted for the rest of the day. I'm not big on fashion and I'm all for self-expression, she'd snorted as she'd gone to get him some coffee, but really, I'm starting to think that he was born without common sense. The corner of his mouth twitched as the two boys did a little trash-talking before they got around to exchanging blows. He shouldn't have any favorites in this exam, but he couldn't help hoping that his assistant's son did well. He'd known the boy ever since he was barely more than a toddler and he adored the rascally brat. I wouldn't mind having a kid like him. The Hokage shifted on his catwalk perch and watched intently as the preliminary match commenced. Well, Uzumaki Naruto, let's see what you can do. So, you'll give these to Hokage-sama? Of course, she smiled at the bright-eyed young blonde woman and accepted the paper bag filled with fresh, homemade cookies. Thank you. The woman smiled and scampered away. He'll get your cookies, if there are any left by the time he returns from the Forest of Death. Rolling her eyes, she pocketed the note that came with the cookies and carried the bag to the Jounin lounge where she abandoned it to whoever had a hungry sweet tooth. I don't see why they keep trying, she mentally snorted and went about the tower, collecting various bits of paperwork to dump on the Hokage's desk. Baked goods, flowers, and love letters don't work. If they had, he would be married with a pack of kids by now. Thank God I was never so hopeless. Irritating female fans were one of the hazards when a young, handsome bachelor was made Hokage, she supposed. At least she'd figured out a handy way of disposing of their unwanted tokens of affection. Hokage-sama never seemed to know what to do with the gifts his admirers gave him, so she distributed the food throughout the tower for any ninja to nibble on, used the flowers to decorate her own house, filed the letters and cards away in a file cabinet should anyone ever want to look at the things, and took whatever else was left over to pawnshops or donated it to charity. Kushina-san. Kushina-san. She cringed and peered over her shoulder to find her fears confirmed. Yeah, Ebisu? May I assist you? The shade-wearing ninja asked hopefully. She glanced down at the stack of file folders, scrolls, and miscellaneous papers that she was barely keeping a grip of, and sighed. Okay. The special Jounin cheerfully accepted most of the load from her arms and followed her down the hall to the Hokage's office. While Kushina appreciated the help, she rather wished that some other ninja had offered her aid. Preferably one who wasn't part of her thankfully small but irritatingly persistent fan club, like Ebisu was. I must say, Kushina-san, you're looking exceptionally lovely today, Ebisu grinned, peering over the top of his round shades. That's nice, she grunted and yanked the office door open. If you could put all of that there, she gestured towards the Hokage's desk, I'll get it set up for Hokage-sama's perusal. The second phase of the Chuunin exams is due to complete soon, the special Jounin remarked as he deposited the load of paperwork where she had pointed. In the interim between the second and third phases of the exam, would you care to join me for lunch? I have heard of a new cafe opening and I would like to gain your opinion. I'm busy, Ebisu, Kushina muttered and started sorting things into piles. And besides, as I've told you before, Naruto is my screener. If he doesn't like you, I won't even consider dating you. She flashed her pesta-tight smile. And Naruto doesn't think too much of you. Ebisu looked like he'd bitten into an especially sour lemon. Every man who tried to weasel a date out of her was driven away or kept at bay at the mention of her son. No matter how attractive and intriguing they found her, when they were reminded that getting involved with her meant associating with the demon brat, they tended to back off really quick. The very fact that she was the mother of the Bakemono probably turned off 90% of the men who might otherwise be interested in getting to know her better. I never thought Naruto's pariah status would ever be useful. She rather angrily tapped a bunch of forms that needed stamping to arrange them in a severely neat stack. Of course, if I had it my way, no one who didn't need to know about the demon would know about it. But things weren't her way. As it was, she considered it a miracle that she'd kept custody of her son and prevented him from being forged into a weapon for the village. It was hard, but she did her best to look at the bright side of things. If she didn't, despair would have destroyed her long ago, before she'd even had the chance to be a ninja of the leaf, probably. One day you'll show them, Naruto. She thought fiercely. One day they'll see you for who you are, not what they think you are. And with these Chuunin exams, maybe one day will be soon. The boy's low opinion of me probably stems from the fact that I am a teacher, and according to his poor grades he has no love for teachers or education, Ebisu sniffed. Speaking of teaching, don't you have Konohamaru and his little gang to be tutoring? Kushina asked. Currently they are still in class at the academy, the special Jounin informed her. Are you certain you don't wish to join me at that cafe I mentioned? We both have time. I'm busy, she muttered and brushed past him out of the office. Excuse me. She stormed her way up through the tower until she reached the platform-like roof. Leaning against one of the curved pillars, which gave the tower the appearance of wearing a claw-like crown, she stared out in the general direction of Training Field 44, the dreaded Forest of Death. Judging by how long it was taking the Hokage to return, they were holding preliminary matches in the small, hidden arena building there. Normally she would watch the preliminary matches, if there were any, with the Hokage when the exam was held in Konoha. But Naruto was competing in this exam, and there was no way she would risk hurting his chances for advancement by tainting the Hokage's opinion. And if he made it to the final round, she would sit in the stands with everyone else, instead of up by the Hokage's seat of honor. I wish I knew how things were going though, she pouted. No one leaves the Forest of Death until the preliminaries are over. Unless, of course, they need dire medical attention. But she would know if that had happened to Naruto. Not that it would. Fox Demon healing machine aside, Naruto was an Uzumaki, and that made him tough. If anyone came out of the Forest of Death for medical reasons, it would be that girly wimp of a kunoichi that he'd been teamed with. If only Naruto would stop chasing her. She's obviously into little Sasuke, and smacks Naruto at the drop of a hat. She shook her head and scowled at the wind blew all the loose strands of red hair that had escaped her braid into her face. Really, I don't see what's so appealing about her. She's smart and has good control, but her ninja skills are mediocre at best, and her stamina is pathetic. Deadweight with brains is still deadweight. After meeting her son's teammates once they'd been accepted by their sensei, she'd immediately found the pink-haired fangirl to be the weak link. She'd offered to tutor the girl, but been turned down. The silly girl was worried that by accepting the tutoring offer, she would somehow be offending her primary sensei or something. Offend Kakashi? She snorted. The slacker would love it if I whipped her into shape for him. Perhaps now that she's gotten a good taste of the real ninja world, she'll reconsider. The cry of a soaring hawk momentarily distracted her. She watched as the bird of prey lazily circled high over the village. Seeing how it wasn't in any hurry to go anywhere, she concluded that it was just a wild bird and not bearing some important message. She eyed it wistfully for a minute, before turning her gaze down to the sea of roofs below. It was funny how life turned out sometimes, she reflected. As a child, all she dreamed of was being a top kunoichi. Playing house and wearing dresses were for little sissy girls, boys were for punching, not kissing. Babies were disgusting and annoying. Reading was only for when you were sick or injured and unable to do anything really productive. And who needed to know how to cook when there was instant cup ramen and takeout? Yet here she was, grown and a retired kunoichi. She'd kissed a boy and done a great deal more with him. She'd had a baby and raised him up to genin. As the Hokage's assistant, she spent a great deal of time reading, writing, and researching when she wasn't fetching coffee or fast food. And horror beyond horror, she'd learned how to cook. If the young me were to meet the current me, she'd be so angry and embarrassed. Kushina smiled humorlessly and futilely tried to keep the loose strands of hair out of her eyes. But I wouldn't change anything. Well, okay, maybe a few things, but not Naruto. If she could have her way, the Kyuubi wouldn't exist, or at least pick some other target to try and raise. The damnable Bijou would be mortal and therefore killable, instead of requiring imprisonment within an infant host. He wouldn't have gone on that mission, he would have come back himself, he would still love her. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a small pack of ANBU bounding over the rooftops, cocooning a single figure. So, the second part of the exam is over, then. Pushing off the pillar, she retreated down the trapdoor and back into the tower. I better get him his coffee, and maybe one of those cookies, if there are any left. 15 minutes later, she sat by one of the windows in the Hokage's office, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand, a small paper plate of the last of the cookies in the other, and a cookie in her mouth. Damn, these things are good. Tastes like vanilla and cinnamon. I ought to track this girl down and steal her recipe. The office door creaked open and she immediately switched gears. Kushina chucked the coffee out the open window, shut the window, and started lowering all the blinds, putting the whole office into shadow. Leaving the cookies on the windowsill, she activated the soundproofing seals built into the walls while the ANBU helped the Hokage to his seat. As soon as the ANBU withdrew, she hung the Do Not Disturb tag on the door handle, shut the door, and locked it. He looked awful. He was slumped in his nice leather swivel chair, pale and sweaty and sick-looking. If she hadn't seen it so many times before, it would have freaked her out. Careful to be as quiet as possible, she retrieved a rag from one of his desk drawers and soaked it in the small pitcher of lukewarm water that was always sitting at the corner of his desk. She gently removed his forehead protector and brushed aside damp golden-yellow spikes of hair to reveal the angry red glow of an incomplete seal. Swallowing a sigh, she pressed the wet cloth to the ugly, fragmentary marks to ease the burning pain. Shina-san, he wheezed, eyes squeezed shut against the migraine. Say shush, she whispered. Don't talk. I'm right here, Yandame-sama. If you truly love something, let it go. Her father had told her once about a seagull chick she'd kept and raised as pet. If it comes back, it's yours. If not, then it's happier being free. I'm right here, Minato. You don't remember me, but I'm here. I'll always be here, no matter what. Chapter 2. Broken Curse. Pink Snow. No. Petals from cherry blossoms. Drifting around him like magical confetti. Slender fingers grasped his shoulders from behind. Long strands of bold red fluttered with the petals in the light breeze. There was a warm puff of breath on the back of his neck. Minato. He snapped upright and clutched at his forehead as invisible burning needles were stabbed into his brain. It was agonizing, but thankfully brief. When it ceased, he opened his eyes and found himself in his bedroom. I must have been dreaming about a memory. He guessed glumly. It was impossible to tell whether he was correct in his guess or not. The painful jolt to wakefulness had erased whatever he'd been dreaming about. It happened almost every morning and was a very irritating way to wake up. Scrubbing a hand over his face, he dragged himself out of bed and went about his morning routine. A nice hot shower washed away the lingering fuzz of sleep and helped ease the residual throbbing of his head. Once the bathroom was all steamy and the hot water was in danger of running out, he moved on to brushing his teeth and shaving. Wiping some of the fog off the mirror, he scowled at his reflection. He didn't even have to push back his hair to see the ugly red marks etched into his forehead. Even when they were covered up by his hideate, he could still see them in his own mind's eye. The seal marks were a dull red, the color of dried blood, not the usual black, or even the strange pale green of the Hyuga's caged bird seal. It looked like knots of barbed wire or thorny branches, but with clear gaps and obvious missing pieces. Whoever had applied the seal to him had done a shoddy and incomplete job. And no one knew what the seal was. The Sandaime Hokage, sometimes referred to as the professor for his great knowledge, had been unable to decipher it. Jiraiya-sama, a renowned expert on seals, didn't know what it was. And he himself, also supposedly a seal expert, couldn't make heads or tails of it either. The incomplete pattern matched nothing in the village archives. Any attempt to probe the markings and find out their structure caused him intense pain. Every attempt to remove them had caused even greater pain, sometimes even landing him in the hospital and leaving him comatose for several days afterwards. In the end, the Sandaime had put a stop to any further attempts to tamper with or remove the seal out of fear that he would be permanently damaged or killed. Instead, the effects of the seal were covered up. Officially, he'd suffered a severe concussion that had resulted in partial, permanent amnesia, and left him with the occasional migraine. But in reality, all his troubles stemmed from the seal he kept hidden under his forehead protector. I don't know who I am. I don't remember my parents. I don't remember my sensei. I don't remember my students. I don't remember my friends, or my enemies. All I have are my ninja skills, which I don't remember learning, and what other people tell me. I hate this. Trying to remember did no good. Whenever he tried to focus on some story about something he'd done or experienced, or some object that was supposedly important to him, he'd get a migraine. The seal, incomplete and probably malformed as it was, blanked his memory, and kept it blank. Yesterday was strange though, he frowned as he got dressed. I wasn't trying to remember anything when I got that migraine. I was just leaving the hidden complex in the forest of death when it just hit me. Putting aside the troubling event, he finished dressing and paused at the nightstand by his bed. On the small table sat 3 framed pictures, a portrait of his dead parents, a photo of his child self with his sensei and 2 teammates, both deceased now, and a picture of himself as a sensei with 3 students, 2 of which were dead. They didn't mean much to him. He didn't remember the people or how his relationship had been with them. But he kept the images, nonetheless. Also resting on the small table was a tiny velvet box. He had found it when he'd been packing up to move into the Hokage manor after he'd been talked into accepting the position after the Sandaime's death from the demon ceiling. Brushing his fingertips pensively over the case, he opened it to stare at what it contained. The ring was pale gold with a small light green stone framed by what he guessed were 2 tiny diamonds. The band was decorated with simple etched patterns that looked like wind-blown leaves. It didn't look like an engagement ring, but it was clearly intended for a lady's hand. He was also certain that it wasn't a family heirloom, it was shiny and new, not scuffed and worn. Jiraiya-sama and Kakashi-san assure me that I had no girlfriend, that there was no one special in my life. He snapped the box shut and set it down, seeking to dodge the building pressure in his skull. But if there was no one, why do I have that ring? Massaging his throbbing temples, he turned and headed for the office. Kushina sipped at her tea while she watched Naruto bolt down his breakfast. He was so wound up about training for the exams that she almost had to tie him to the chair to convince him to eat first. His enthusiasm was excellent, but if he didn't leash and focus it, it would do more to hinder his training than help it. So, he made it to the finals, and he'll be pitted against Hyuga Niji. That's a real hard match. Niji's got a full year of experience on him and a Kekkai Genkai on top of that. But Naruto had a good reason to beat that kid. He'd told her all about the slaughter match between the 2 Hyuga, and how cruel Niji had been to his cousin. If she'd been there as she usually was, they would have had to hold her back from throttling the stuck-up brat herself. You don't Don't do stuff like that to family. She hid her frown in her teacup. And the Hyubis claim that their clan management through the caged bird seal isn't internally divisive. Lies. I bet Kakashi-sensei's gonna teach me something really cool to stomp Niji with. Naruto grinned and stuffed more egg into his mouth. Don't talk with your mouth full, Kushina reminded him. Her boy seemed to be forgetting that Sasuke had also advanced to the final round, and they shared the same teacher. There was no way for Kakashi to adequately prepare both boys at the same time because they would immediately know all of the other's secrets should they end up fighting each other as the tournament progressed. In fact, she knew Kakashi's plans already. The Jounin had swung by just before she'd gone to wake Naruto for breakfast to fill her in. Kakashi would find a tutor to take over Naruto's training while he took Sasuke out of the village to train. Orochimaru, that traitorous snake, had infiltrated the exam and made some kind of attempt on the Uchiha boy. Clearly the rogue Sannin was after the rare and deadly Sharingan, and Sasuke was his best bet to get it. Even if Orochimaru wasn't slinking around, he would take Sasuke. Kakashi sees himself in that boy. And he sees Obito. Those two factors alone cement Sasuke as the favored student. Done. Naruto cried and dumped his dishes in the sink. Try not to do anything too strenuous for at least an hour, or you're going to throw all that back up. She yelled after him as he dashed out the door. Bye. The door slammed and she rolled her eyes. Kids. Oh well. She polished off her tea and went about watering her houseplants. Better get ready for work. With that snake sniffing around, things are going to be tenser than usual. Has it been bothering you lately? The Hokage paused in skimming the report in his hand and glanced over to see a towering, white-haired man leaning against his office wall. What? The seal, the intruder clarified. He went back to the report. Not as much lately. Once a week, if that. Well, that's good news, at least. The yandere made no reply. Maybe if I ignore him, he'll get to the point, or go away. His uninvited visitor was Jiraiya of the Densetsu no Sannin, and his former sensei. Personally, he wasn't terribly impressed with the man. Jiraiya was open and downright proud of his vices: whoring, drinking, and a little gambling. The young Hokage really had no idea how he'd managed to stand the man, let alone learned anything useful from him. While the man had been partially helpful in the beginning after the loss of his memory into the early days of his ascendancy to Hokage, Jiraiya eventually drifted away to keep tabs on the rogue Orochimaru and various other threats to the village. The yandere had been rather glad to see him gone. I assume you've noticed that Orochimaru is slinking around, Jiraiya remarked. Yes, Jiraiya-sama, he nodded, eyes never leaving the mission notes. Kakashi-san reported to me that Orochimaru assaulted his students in the Forest of Death and attempted to do something to Uchiha Sasuke. So, he seeks the power of the Sharingan, the lecher mused. But that's not all he's after. It would be much less risky to capture Sasuke while he's out on a mission instead of infiltrating the village at a time like this, when security is heightened for the exams. He's come here for some other reason. There was a sigh. Mark my words, there will be trouble this exam. Great, the Hokage muttered, slumping into his seat. Just what I need. Well, I'll be around. When the Hokage glanced up, he was alone again. Good riddance. The Sannin always made him feel uncomfortable. And it wasn't just because of the man's shameful peeping habit or the way he tended to hit on anything young, female, and well-endowed. The other reason was that Jiraiya really seemed genuinely upset that his sole surviving student no longer remembered him or liked him. This seal. He frowned and sorted through the business on his desk. It doesn't just hurt me. It hurts everyone who knew me and cared for me. He thought back to the ring and sighed. Naruto anxiously hopped from one foot to the other as he waited for his chronically tardy sensei to show up. He stood by the little bridge, Team 7's little meeting spot. Sakura wasn't there, as she had failed to go on to the final round. And Sasuke wasn't around for some reason. But Kakashi-sensei said to meet here to start my training for the finals, he thought fiercely. He'd better not be super late like he usually is. I need every second of training so that I can beat Neji down. I got a promise to keep after all. Just thinking about the terrible beating Hinata had taken, and Neji's cruel words, and all that blood, it really fired him up. Yes. Naruto flinched and looked around frantically. Who said that? Hearing nothing else, and seeing nothing, he decided that it was his imagination, and went back to impatiently waiting. Come on, come on, come on. Arg. Damn you, Kakashi-sensei. Yo. Naruto immediately locked onto his silver-haired sensei and jabbed an accusing finger. You're late. I only told you to wait for me at the usual place, Kakashi cheerfully told him. I never gave you an exact time. It's almost noon. Naruto screeched. I don't have time to be wasting waiting for you. Now, here's your tutor. My. Naruto broke off in confusion and turned to see the other ninja standing beside his sensei. Him? It was Ebisu. The closet pervert. Konohamaru's tutor. His mother's stalker. You're ditching me with him? Naruto, Ebisu is an excellent teacher, Kakashi lightly chided. Teaching is his personal specialty. He'll definitely be able to help you out. Can't you find someone else if you're not going to teach me? Naruto whined. No time, I need to go pick up Sasuke. Kakashi waved cheerfully. Bye. And then he vanished in a puff of smoke. It really wasn't fair. Kakashi-sensei was an awesome ninja with a Sharingan eye and 1,000 jutsu at his disposal. And Ebisu was just nowhere near as cool. And an annoying jerk who was hot on his mom, too. Naruto scowled at the shade-wearing special jounin. You're just doing this to score points with my mom, aren't you? The closet pervert straightened his glasses and cleared his throat. Come along now, we have a lot of work to do. The genin sighed and slunk after his tutor. This sucks. Uchiha Sasuke mechanically ate his breakfast and studiously ignored the empty spaces at the table. He also avoided looking at his mother's cheerful face. He didn't understand why she did her best to pretend that nothing was wrong while in truth everything was wrong. Nearly 5 years ago, Itachi, his older brother, the youngest ever ANBU captain, pride and joy of the whole Uchiha clan, the greatest hope for the future, had snapped and gone on a killing spree. His Aniki had killed their father, every Uchiha who had awakened the Sharingan, every active Uchiha ninja, and most of the adult males within the Uchiha district. He left only their mother, the women, the elderly, and children around Sasuke's age and younger alive. And then Itachi vanished from Konoha without a trace. The mighty Uchiha clan was now reduced to barely a quarter of its former size. The military police had to be disbanded because of low numbers and the clan's refusal to open membership to a larger number of non-Uchiha. And the handful of active ninja that the clan had produced were only slightly older than Sasuke. There were no adult ninja, no jounin, and only 2 chunin. Sasuke set his used dishes in the sink and retreated to collect his things. Kakashi had told him to pack for a month. Apparently, they would be leaving the village to train for the final phase of the Chunin exams. It's because of that strange nin Orochimaru, Sakura said he called himself. When Kakashi heard about what happened in the Forest of Death, he got worried. Why else would he go so far as to take me outside of Konoha to teach me? He paused in his packing to rub at the side of his neck. I suppose it's a good thing that the dobe managed to destroy the mark that Sakura said that the freak bit into my neck. Kakashi looked way too relieved when he just found irritated skin when he checked. Whatever that mark was, it was bad. It really irked him that it was Naruto that he had to be thankful to. The class clown and all-around screw-up kept surprising him and he was getting tired of it. First it had been somehow achieving genin when he'd bombed the exam 3 times in a row. Then it had been whipping out a couple of advanced jutsus that no genin should know when the kid couldn't seem to get the basics down. And then there had been the mission to Wave where he not only knew how to climb trees with chakra, and had mercilessly taunted Sasuke about it until the Uchiha had mastered the skill, but he'd taken down Haku after Sasuke had gotten himself knocked out and turned into a human pincushion. And now he knows some obscure jutsu for breaking weird seals. Sasuke shook his head and pulled his pack over his shoulders. Nothing about that dope makes any sense. If Naruto already knew a chakra control exercise like tree walking, why couldn't he manage to do a proper Bunshin no Jutsu in class? And then how could he go on to master the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a Jounin level technique, when he still couldn't pull off a decent, plain old Bunshin? How could he not only survive Haku, but defeat him? If that dope manages to survive in the tournament long enough to fight me, I'll find out, he thought as he distractedly said farewell to his mother. If he manages to defeat the Hyuga, he'll definitely be worth my while to fight. And then I'll get my answers. Training with Ebisu sucked big time. The free lunch was cool, and a very obvious attempt to curry favor, but it was ruined by the whole lecture on chakra control. It was like being back in school, only worse, because it was Ebisu teaching instead of Iruka-sensei. When he found out that the chakra control exercise that Ebisu wanted to teach him was something he already knew how to do, he was thoroughly underwhelmed. It had been pretty funny to see the look on the guy's face when he strolled all over the boiling hot surface of the stream formed by the runoff of one of Konoha's largest public onsen. It was also a lot of fun to gloat that his mother had taught him how to do that when he was 11. Before Ebisu could recover his wits, they noticed some guy peeping through the fence at the women's bath. Ebisu, the pervert in deep denial, went crazy and tried to attack the weird, white-haired man. But his target simply called up a large toad, which used its tongue to one-hit KO the special Jounin with no apparent effort. Naruto immediately thought the guy was awesome, and then almost as quickly changed his mind as the towering man went through a weird, stupid intro, complete with a dance of some kind. But he said he's one of the Sannin. Naruto frowned as he squinted thoughtfully at the perv, who had gone back to ogling the pretty girls through a knothole in the fence. The Sannin are supposed to be a trio of super ninja, or something. So that means he's at least as awesome as Kakashi-sensei, if not better. Straight out asking the guy to take over his training hadn't worked, but there were other ways to get his cooperation. The man was clearly into naked women. Very into them. And he could use that. He'd originally invented his unique style of henge as a joke, and to make mastering the technique more interesting. His mother didn't really appreciate it and grounded him for 2 weeks after learning about it, as well as forbidding him from using it in class upon pain of further grounding. Sakura-chan and most other girls hated it and would smack him around if he was caught doing it. But they never had to know. Okay, you weirdo Erosenin. He ran through the seals, made the transformation, and moved into position. You're mine. And so, Naruto went about seducing himself a new, better tutor. Chapter 3. Broken Heart. Naruto darted through the village in the fading afternoon light. It was a little disappointing that he hadn't learned anything the first day of training, but Erosenin promised that they would start something the next morning. He could barely wait. Taidama. He squealed as he skidded through the apartment door. You seem to have an awful lot of energy after a day of hard training, his mother observed as she studied one of her bonsai trees critically, her tiny pruning scissors in one hand. Things didn't go as planned, Naruto shrugged. But tomorrow will be better. She snipped a few leaves and set her scissors down. Oh. Kakashi-sensei dumped me, with Ebisu, Naruto explained. But I ditched him and found a better tutor. Oh really? She raised a red eyebrow. Who? This crazy old guy who says he's Jiraiya of the Sannin, Naruto shrugged. He seems kinda stupid, but he took Ebisu out with one hit, so he's gotta be good. His mother stared at him for a minute. Jiraiya? She blinked. Long white hair, red-line tattoos on his cheeks, found near a bar, brothel, or bathhouse? At his nod, she laughed. Ha, excellent. Naruto rubbed thoughtfully at the back of his head. He seems strong enough, but he's so weird. Is he really that great? Yes. Yes, she snorted. Eccentricities and bad habits aside, he's a truly excellent ninja. He was a student of the Sandaime Hokage, and he taught Yondaime-sama all his ninja skills. He was Yondaime-sama's sensei? Naruto gaped. She nodded. They used to be very close. Not long after Hokage-sama came to power, Jiraiya took to a lot of traveling and rarely returned to the village, otherwise you would have met him before. Awesome. Naruto grinned. With a teacher great enough to teach the Hokage, I'll totally beat Niji's butt. And Sasuke's, too. So long as you work hard and avoid picking up his bad habits, he'll help you become a great ninja, his mom smiled. All right. He cheered and pumped his fist. I'll be Hokage in no time. Well, let's worry about the Chuunin exams first, she snorted. And before that, dinner. When Naruto mentioned Jiraiya, Kushina braced herself for a visit from the self-proclaimed super pervert. Thankfully, he did not appear before, during, or after dinner. He was considerate enough to wait until Naruto was in bed before coming in through the window she'd left open for him. Or maybe his timing was a fortunate bit of chance. She really didn't want Naruto around or conscious for the inevitable talk. Why didn't you say anything? Kushina focused on carefully mending the innumerable tears in Naruto's clothes. You know better than anybody how many women popped out of the woodwork and claimed to be his secret girlfriend or lover or wife of soon-to-be mother of his children when it came out that he had contracted some memory problems. I had no desire to be added to that list and stir up controversy and scandal and make myself a pretty little target for all of his enemies. She tied off the thread and started on a new rip. I had an unplanned pregnancy to deal with that became my priority. I simply didn't have enough energy to spare on anything else. I would have believed you. You two were friends, and you're not the type of girl who would seriously claim to be involved with someone when you really weren't. He was silent for a minute. Why did you two keep things secret? He didn't want me to become a target for his enemies, or for gossip, or for his loyal fans. And he didn't tell you because he was afraid you'd make a big deal out of him kissing a girl and losing his virginity and all that. She shrugged. I didn't really care about any of that, but he asked me to when I didn't want people to start thinking that I wasn't as much of a tough girl because I had a boyfriend to get all mushy with. It was actually kind of fun to sneak around, exciting. So have you filled Minato in? No. Why the hell not? He half roared. Keep it down. She snapped. Despite the fact that my claim was legitimate, it really didn't mean anything. If I told him that we had been seeing each other and that the baby I was carrying was his, it would be no different than if a random pregnant woman had made that claim. He didn't know me, doesn't know how things were. Sure, he would have stepped up and taken care of us if I had told him and you back me, but we would have been obligations to him. And while he might have come to love one or both of us, it was just as likely that he would come to resent us instead. Resent you? Jiraiya sputtered. Minato wouldn't. Minato wouldn't, no, she agreed, setting aside the shirt she'd been working on and moving on to a pair of pants. But Minato never came back from that mission. A shadow of him came back, a stranger wearing his face. Kushina finally looked up at the Sannin standing in her living room. You know it as well as I do. The towering mountain of a man tried to protest, but slumped in defeat. He slunk over to her couch and melted into it. Kushina kept sewing. I suppose my childhood in Whirlpool is part of the reason I've chosen what I have, she remarked after a long silence. Yuzu was small, and every ninja counted. Birth control was frowned upon as every new baby was vital to the village's future. But ninja life was the same there as it is here, and many blew off steam by doing things like drinking, gambling, or casual sex. While it's not smiled upon to be a single mother in Konoha, it was the worst kind of social suicide in Yuzu to have a baby out of wedlock. I had several friends who were oops babies, and I vividly remember how unhappy their homes were. She shook her head. I didn't want to risk that for Naruto. I would much rather he grow up with just me in a happy home, than in a home with a father and a dark cloud hanging over it. The Sannin made no comment. Instead, he asked another question. Why did you volunteer Naruto to be the Fox's jailer? Well, who else was going to do it? Kushina snorted. Most of the only other candidates for the job were babies born of civilian parents. The old man never finished explaining what he wanted to do before they turned him down. And the few ninjas selfishly told him to find some other baby. None of them had any faith in the Sandame's brains or the future Yandame's seals. I did. And I had faith that Naruto could handle it. He's an Uzumaki, and my son, and Minato's son, he's all kinds of tough. She finished her sewing and packed up her needles and thread. The situation was desperate and extreme measures were necessary. I'd already lost my birth home to IWA, I wasn't about to lose home number 2 to a giant, smelly fox. And without a home, what sort of future would there be for my son? Jiraiya nodded in agreement, but he didn't look happy. She wasn't happy either for a whole mountain of different reasons. But that was life, and life wasn't fair, and it wasn't going to get the better of her either. I don't suppose that there's any way that I can convince you to enlighten Minato on Naruto's paternity? The white-haired man sighed. No, she smiled with a bit of forced cheer. And I would very much appreciate it if you joined Kakashi in keeping your mouth shut about it. Kakashi knows too? Yeah, she nodded and settled back in her chair. He confronted me about it after encountering a 2-year-old Naruto. He was most curious to know why my son looked even more like the Hokage than he did as a newborn. Has Minato ever asked about Naruto's parentage or why the kid looks so much like him? Jiraiya asked. Has he even seen Naruto much since the sealing? He sees Naruto all the time. Naruto's a genin now, so he sees the Hokage for missions, and I work as the Hokage's assistant, so he hung around the office all the time before making genin. As for Yandame-sama asking about Naruto's origins, she frowned and shook her head. I have no idea why he doesn't ask. Almost every day I expect him to turn to me and bring it up, but he doesn't. And no one else notices the resemblance? The Sannin frowned. Apparently not, she shrugged. But then again, most people don't even see a human boy when they look at him, all they see is the demon. She snarled a little. Ignorant, bigoted assholes. Ah. Anyway, Kushina smirked and leaned forward in her chair. I hear that you're training Naruto for the final round. What do you plan on teaching him to do? I plan on teaching him how to consciously draw on the demon's chakra, Jiraiya informed her. He's done it at least once unconsciously. Now he needs to know how to do it on purpose. The idea made her uneasy, but Jiraiya was Minato's teacher and a master of seals. If anything went wrong, he would be able to handle it. And if anything went wrong, she knew how to find him and how to beat him up. How do you plan on getting him to do that? She asked curiously. I'm going to let him sign the contract with the toads, he replied. Summoning takes a lot of chakra. If I wear him out and then have him try to summon, he'll have to get power from the fox if he wants to get more than a tadpole. You're letting him on the contract? Summoning contracts weren't passed around like candy. They were carefully guarded by the most senior summoner and shared only with the best of the best students. Being allowed to sign such a contract was a rare and high honor, and something 12-year-olds generally weren't allowed to do. Sure, he grinned. He's the child of my greatest student. He'll do fine. All right, she sighed. Just be careful. Minato told me about the first time he managed to summon Gamabunta. It sounded pretty crazy. No worries, the Sannin chuckled. Seemingly rejuvenated after all the depressing talk, he hopped up from the couch and started for the open window to make his exit. With his foot on the sill, he hesitated. "Tell me, where did you get the brat's name from?" "Pregnant women can't really do anything, so I spent most of my time reading stuff," Kushina shrugged. "So, I ended up reading that first book you wrote, you know, the good one that isn't dripping with sex. That's where I got the name." Jiraiya looked dumbfounded. "Really?" "Yeah." Her eyes drifted to the blue-carpeted floor. "I just thought, after reading it, that if Minato was himself, he'd want to steal that name since the story was so good and the character so realistic and admirable, and since you wrote the book to begin with. He would, if he was himself." Kushina looked up and found that Jiraiya had departed and left the window open. Rolling her eyes, she shut the window and gathered up the clothes that she'd finished fixing. Careful not to wake him, she carried the small pile of clothes into Naruto's room and put them in their proper drawers. Before she left, she took a moment to watch him peacefully sleep in the dim light that seeped in through his cracked door. "Sleep well, baby. Tomorrow, you learn to summon toads like your father. And hopefully you'll take your first step in taming that mean old fox, too." The yondaime was unpleasantly surprised to find Jiraiya in his bedroom when he got out of the shower. The Sannin was casually strolling around the room, glancing around with mild curiosity. The Hokage dropped the hand towel he'd been rubbing at his freshly shaved face with over the velvet ring box that he'd left out on the nightstand before confronting the intruder. "Can I help you?" "Nice room, but not much personality to it," Jiraiya remarked. "This is an official, historical residence," the yondaime frowned. "It's not my house. I don't feel comfortable altering it. You should get a girlfriend. Women have a knack for decorating a house and making it feel homey." The young Hokage felt distinctly uncomfortable and did his best not to think of his assistant. "I don't have time to date," he replied stiffly. "Especially not now with the exams going on." The white-haired Sannin leaned against one of the bedposts and eyed him speculatively. "I heard that you found yourself a permanent, female assistant." "I'm not going to date her," the blonde nearly growled. The older man arched an eyebrow. "I wasn't going to suggest you do that. But since you brought it up, why not?" "She's my subordinate," he muttered through clenched teeth as his face heated in embarrassment. "It would be inappropriate. She also has a son," indicating a serious prior relationship with someone else. "Well, yeah," the Sannin frowned. "People rarely find the one with the first person they date, or the first person they sleep with. Just because she has a kid doesn't mean she's untouchable. If she's not married, a grieving widow, or involved with someone else, she's fair game, you know." The yondaime was appalled at the teacher he couldn't remember. "I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that. Touchy, aren't we?" Jiraiya muttered. "Anyway, I ran into her kid, which is how I found out about your little assistant in the first place. Interesting brat. Looks an awful lot like you." "That he does," the Hokage agreed and moved to his closet to dig out a fresh flak vest and flame-trimmed long jacket. "He looks so much like you, you'd think he was your kid, too. I certainly wouldn't mind if he was, but he isn't. Kushina-san would have told me if he was. And besides," he glanced over his shoulder briefly at his ex-sensei, "you and Kakashi-san both agree that I never had a serious relationship with anyone." "We could have been wrong," he shrugged. "Unlikely, but possible." "If he was mine, she would have said so," the yondaime muttered. "Now, was there anything important you had to tell me?" "No, nothing to report. I was just killing time and curious." The man saluted and strolled to the window. "Now I've got an appointment with a potential student to keep." The yondaime frowned and was about to ask about it, but the Sannin had already vanished. Shaking his head, he hoped that whoever this potential student was, he, or she, did not pick up Jiraiya's stack of bad habits. One Jiraiya was bad enough, Konoha didn't need anymore.
Shoving aside the conversation, he uncovered the ring box and stashed it away in the nightstand drawer.
He'd never shown the ring to Kakashi or Jiraiya.
It was childish and stupid and probably a little selfish, but he wanted to keep just one secret from them. They knew him better than he knew himself now, and he found that uncomfortably intimate.
This one secret helped a bit. Breakfast, and then off to the office.
The great Jiraiya peered through the brush and appreciatively eyed his prey. A handful of decently endowed young beauties in pretty little bikinis frolicked in a shallow pool near a small waterfall. And they had no idea that he was watching.
Darn it!
The Sannin growled and peered over his shoulder to see his potential apprentice glaring at yet another dinky tadpole.
Keep it down, would you? I'm researching. Jiraiya hissed.
Stupid perv, he heard Naruto mutter as he flicked the tadpole into a nearby creek and went about trying it again.
Jiraiya ignored the comment and went back to ogling the bathing beauties.
Watching pretty girls giggle and splash each other was a great deal more pleasant than thinking about all the things going wrong.
Much more pleasant, indeed. There's Orochimaru and whatever he's planning. There's this new ninja group, Oto.
There's the usual worries of the exams.
And there are two stubborn idiots that I want to smack some real sense into.
Kushina refused to risk her heart and fight for her man, choosing instead to let his ignorance rule their relationship.
Minato foolishly buried whatever attraction he felt for her out of some misguided sense of duty and politeness and idiotically overlooked the glaring evidence of his former relationship. Damn idiots, the both of them. I am going to block their chakra and lock them in a closet. But not now.
Now was time for the exams.
Minato had a village a run and a tournament to oversee. Kushina had to help him.
And he himself had a kid to prepare.
After the exams, he resolved. When things settle, I will get them to hook back up if it's the last thing I do. Damn! Naruto cursed as he summoned yet another useless tadpole. But first things first, get this baka to summon Gamabunta. He peered over his shoulder and scowled at Naruto scowling at the flopping prototoad. This is going to take a while. Chapter 4. Broken Silence. Kushina polished her kunai and shuriken in a rather grim state of mind. This exam was shaping up to be the worst Konoha-Chunin exam in her memory, perhaps the worst ever. And it was only looking to get worse. First there had been Orochimaru infiltrating the Forest of Death and interfering with Naruto's team. Then there had been several excessively bloody preliminary matches, Hyuga Niji's brutal beating of his own cousin and Sabako no Gaara's near murder of Rock Lee. Now people were turning up dead. Less than half a week after the preliminaries, 2 murder victims turned up. One was Dosu, the lone Oto genin who had advanced to the final round. He had been crushed and torn so badly that he was barely recognizable. The other had been the proctor of the preliminaries and the intended proctor of the final round, Gekko Heiate. The Konoha-nin had either been cut up by a sharp blade, or a concentrated futon attack. The timing and close proximity of both killings made them even more suspicious, and ratcheted up the tension to a nerve-fraying level. Something bad is coming, she frowned. Something really big and really bad. And it has Orochimaru's name all over it. Damn snake. She'd never liked the other male member of the Sannin, even when he'd been a good guy. He was creepy and cold-blooded and ambitious and freakishly smart. She hadn't been the least bit surprised when it came out that he'd experimented on live human subjects and Konoha citizens. She had been quite glad to see him go, but would have preferred that he be killed or hunted down. Leaving him alive was just a recipe for future trouble. Kushina really hated being right sometimes. Carefully packing away her deadly weapons, she turned to watch her son distractedly eat his cup ramen. Every day he dragged himself home or was dropped off after passing out cold, filthy, and exhausted. His fingertips were raw from chewing on them to get the fresh blood necessary to perform the Kuchiyos no Jutsu.
The next morning, he would be ready and raring to go as the demon fox fully healed his fingers and replenished his chakra, but she knew that he was getting frustrated and increasingly desperate.
It had been 2 weeks since he started training, and there were only 2 weeks left before he had to fight Neji. "So, Naruto, how are things going?"
Her son pouted into his noodles.
"Nowhere fast," he sulked.
"Erosenin says I have to burn off my chakra so that I can get at the red chakra easier, but when I try to summon all, I get her tadpoles. The closest I ever got to a toad was a tadpole with dinky back legs and little nubby front legs."
Kushina hummed thoughtfully and drummed her fingertips on the kitchen table.
Uzugakure no Sato had no ninja school. Educating future ninja was handled by ninja clans and families.
And as a foreigner, she really didn't know much about Konoha's history.
So, when Naruto was enrolled in the Ninja Academy and started bringing home homework, she felt as lost as he did most times.
But when it came to helping him learn taijutsu and ninjutsu, she was more in her element.
It quickly became apparent to her that the academy instructors either didn't care to properly teach her son, or even tried to subtly sabotage his education. She actually had to tell Naruto to ignore what his taijutsu instructor was teaching him because the man was obviously coaching him improperly, setting him up to be killed quickly and painfully in his first real fight.
Naruto's difficulties with ninjutsu were more complicated, stemming just as much from instructor neglect as chakra control problems created by the presence of the fox.
She had to be more aggressive with this aspect of his training, teaching him more advanced exercises to help refine his control. By age 10, he could climb trees with chakra and bounce through the branches with the skill of a Chuunin. Just after turning 11, he could not only walk on water, but he could fight on it. And for his 12th birthday, she taught him the Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu, partly out of frustration of his inability to perform the basic Bunshin no Jutsu. Now that he'd hit a brick wall in his current training, he needed her help again.
Or at least give him a nudge or two in a new direction. Just trying the jutsu the same way over and over again simply wasn't getting him anywhere. "Naruto, do you know where the red chakra comes from?"
The boy chewed on the ends of his chopsticks for a minute while he pondered this.
"The fox?"
"Yes," she nodded.
"And how have you been trying to get it?"
"After I use up most of my chakra on other jutsus, I try to reach deeper to get more."
He frowned. "I never find any."
Kushina studied him for a minute, and then stole his half-eaten ramen and held the cup over his head.
"I've stolen your ramen. You can't reach it. You can't beat me to get it back, so what do you do?"
"Wah!"
Naruto wailed. "My ramen."
She pinned him to his seat with her free hand and held the instant ramen cup higher.
"What do you do?" Kushina fought not to smile as she watched the little gears turning behind her son's eyes. "I beg."
"That would work with me," she agreed, and returned the food.
"But that is not what you do with the fox. You talk to it, you ask, but you do not beg. The demon is your prisoner, and he is ultimately bound to you. What affects you will affect him, that's why he heals you and refreshes your chakra so quickly when you exhaust it." Kushina gave him a serious look. "Do you see?"
"I think so," Naruto frowned.
"But, how will I talk to the fox?"
"While you are two separate beings, you share the same body.
You should be able to speak to him in your own mind. The trick is figuring out how to get into contact with him."
She twirled a red lock of hair around her finger as she considered the problem. "Why don't you try some of the meditative memory retrieval techniques you learned in the academy for recalling mission details?"
she suggested.
"If you can use those strategies for poking around the insides of your own mind, you could find the corner where you can talk to the many-tailed furball." Then she shrugged. "And if that doesn't work, ask Jiraiya for some suggestions."
"He's not much help," Naruto huffed.
"I keep trying to summon and he won't give me any tips when I mess up."
"Are you asking specific questions?" Kushina inquired. "And just so you know, what am I doing wrong?" "Doesn't count." "No," he pouted. Well, try that, then, she grinned. Part of his teaching style is to help you learn to teach yourself and learn how to think. Once you can do that, you can learn advanced techniques from scrolls without the help of a teacher and even discover your own techniques. It will help you be a better, smarter ninja. Okay, he muttered dubiously. Go to bed and sleep on it, Kushina smiled and patted him on his head. Make up your mind tomorrow. Her son sighed, finished his soup, and did as she suggested. Once he had vanished into his room, she frowned worriedly. If he does manage to contact the fox, I hope he's careful. Naruto sat on the gravelly bank of the stream and scowled. Erosenin was busy peeping on the girls enjoying the summer weather at the waterfall. He'd just finished wasting chakra on scores of Kage Bunshin and it seemed like the start of another dead-end day of training. But today I'm going to try something new. His mom had a good idea. Blindly digging for the red chakra and trying to steal it wasn't working. So he would try talking. But he had to be careful. After breakfast, his mom had warned him about talking to the fox. The demon couldn't enjoy being confined inside a human prison and would surely try to trick him. You are the warden. It is your responsibility to keep your prisoner locked up and under control. Be wary of any deal he tries to offer you. Look underneath the underneath. And always remember, you are the boss. Naruto folded his arms over his chest, closed his eyes, and got to work. He focused inward, focused on the flow of his own chakra, and tried to find anything unusual or special. If he could just locate the source of the red chakra. Apparently, the inside of his head was a forest. But it was like no forest he was familiar with. The trees were mostly the same giant size as those he'd encountered in the Forest of Death, and all of them looked hollow with various shadowy openings. And there were large mossy vines draped over the tree branches and the leafy ground. Some looked kinda blue, and some looked red. Weird. Not sure how to proceed, he aimlessly followed the tangled pathways of the vines. Some parts of his forest were bright and open, happy places. Others were dark and gloomy and threatening. Naruto paused in his explorations and came to a spot where there were some red and blue vines in close proximity. When he touched the blue vine, it felt like when he touched and molded his own chakra. But the red vine seemed to feel too warm and prickled his hand. Since I'm looking for red chakra. He frowned and poked at the red vine. Maybe I should see where these funny vines come from. It seemed like a good idea. So, he sought a source for the vines. He traced them as they bunched together and got thicker and thicker, and found them growing out of a pile of rocks. Circling the rocks, he found a dark, cave-like opening. Beyond the opening, he found a dark tunnel dimly lit by an eerie red glow. And when he went down the tunnel, he came to a vast underground cave chamber. The red vines covered the walls and ceiling, poking out through various cracks and crevices. The floor was covered in small puddles and he heard water dripping somewhere. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, stalagmites jutted up from the floor, and at the back of the chamber were a pair of massive, intricate golden gates held closed by a tiny piece of plain paper with the kanji 4 seal inked on it. It made him think of a dungeon. I found it, he whispered to himself. Swallowing nervously, Naruto crept right up to the giant cage doors and peered through the narrow gaps in the bars. He saw nothing but endless darkness. It didn't look like anything was in there, but there had to be. Hello? He called, hearing his voice echo a little in the cavernous place. Silence. I know you're in there, Fox. He shouted. Show yourself. It's time we had a talk. A pair of gigantic red eyes snapped open and Naruto felt like he almost broke his own neck trying to look back far enough to see them, they towered so high above his head. There was an ear-shattering roar and a huge hand-like paw shot out from the darkness to slam into the golden bars. Naruto yelped and staggered backwards as the tips of huge sharp claws tried to squeeze through the gaps to pierce him, but the doors held fast and didn't budge so much as a millimeter.
Recovering his wits and taking courage from the strength of the doors and the dinky seal that held them closed, Naruto marched back up to the bars and boldly kicked them.
Knock it off, you. Is that any way to say hello?
Wretched mortal worm, the fox snarled. If not for these bars, I would devour you in an instant.
Release me at once. How dumb do you think I am? Naruto scowled. No way.
The fox let out a hiss that sounded like a burst steam pipe. If you remove that seal and let me free, I will give you more power than your weak mortal mind can imagine.
Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and scowled up at the demon. Is that supposed to tempt me? Isn't power what all humans want?
The fox rumbled. My power is limitless, and as a reward for setting me free I will share some with you.
So let me get this straight. I let you out and you give me power. Exactly. And then you'll do whatever you want and smash the village while you're at it. So? The demon growled.
Why should you care?
Your wretched village despises you. They would gladly see you dead. The fox was right.
The village in general despised his existence. His mother had done her best to give him a normal childhood and shield him from the prejudice and hatred directed towards him. She claimed that people disliked her because she was an unmarried foreigner and only looked down on him because he was her son. But it never quite fit in his mind, and then Mizuki-sensei had blown that excuse out of the water.
Sure, they hate me, Naruto shrugged. They hate me, because of you.
Release me, and they will no longer hate you for containing me.
And then they'll just hate me for letting you out. No matter what you promise me, if I let you out, I lose. Naruto snorted. And once you're free of me, why would have you to keep any promise you make? What's to stop you from just killing me? The fox roared. When I make a promise, I keep it. Unless I am betrayed.
Whatever you say, Naruto shrugged.
I didn't come looking for you to hear about promises. Then why have you come? I want to talk about your chakra. So, you do seek power. Naruto blared at his prisoner. You owe me rent.
The fox snorted incredulously.
Rent? Yeah, Naruto nodded.
You've been hiding inside my body and freeloading my whole life. It's time to start paying.
I did not ask to be here. The demon howled. That old man imprisoned me within you.
Well, I didn't volunteer for this either, Naruto shrugged. I heal your wounds and replenish your puny strength, the demon hissed.
I owe you nothing. You do that anyway, because anything that threatens me, threatens you. If I go, you go with me. I want real rent. How dare you? I don't see what the big deal is, Naruto frowned. It's not like you have anything better to do in here.
The feeling of killing intent, which had already been unreal the moment the red eyes became visible, now spiked even higher. Naruto felt like his skin was trying to crawl off his body and run away and his bones turned to mush. But he stood firm, reminding himself that the fox couldn't get past the bars and do anything worse than refuse him. All I want is easy access to a bit of your chakra, Naruto explained, struggling to keep his voice even. You already let me have some when I fought Haku and in the Forest of Death. Would it really be so much trouble to make it so that I could get that much of your chakra without being in danger of dying or being so furious? It seems like a pretty fair rent to me, considering how difficult you've made my life. The fox snarled and the malicious intent grew stronger. Naruto forced himself to stay standing right in front of the cage and not cringe or shrink. He kept his hands folded to hide the shaking of his hands. All I want is the level of chakra that you gave me in Wave Country, he repeated. The only way I would ever ask for more is if I were in danger of dying. I probably wouldn't even use your chakra that much, I'd much rather depend on only my own strength. Such a small amount of chakra? The demon hissed at last. I could give you more.
I want to build my own strength, Naruto declared. And I admit your chakra is potent and hard to deal with. I don't think I'm old enough and experienced enough to really handle much more without freaking out. Wise of you to acknowledge your limits, the fox rumbled, and the atmosphere lightened somewhat. Wise of you to not be greedy. Tell me, Naruto-kun, what is your ambition? To be Hokage, Naruto answered automatically. To be respected, and prove to the village that I am not you by protecting them instead of destroying them. To be strong, and protect those precious to me. That is my ambition, my dream. The giant red eyes narrowed in deep thought. A most interesting desire you have. If you could achieve it, you would be powerful, your enemies would fear you, and all would respect you. If I must be imprisoned, such a vessel would be worthy of me. The red bestial eyes lowered until they were almost level with his much smaller form. If you can achieve this ambition of yours, all my power will be at your disposal. The demon's lips peeled back in a feral smile, revealing an immense maw of pointed teeth. If you assist me in slaying my great enemy, my power will be yours all the sooner. The idea that the Kyuubi had a great enemy made Naruto shiver. Who or what could be so powerful and nasty to have the king of demon beasts after him? That would depend on who your enemy is, Naruto answered cautiously. And it'll probably be years before I could take one powerful enough to be your enemy on. True, very true, the fox grumbled. But do not worry. My enemy is your enemy and the enemy of all you seek to achieve and protect. The demon straightened up to once again loom over his tiny form. Your boldness amuses me. Your ambition pleases me. And so, I shall grant your humble request for power and pay your foolish rent. A rush of red chakra poured through the bars and flowed around and into Naruto. Kaya. Use it wisely, Naruto-kun. Naruto's eyes snapped open and he found himself still sitting on the stream bank. But now he had the red chakra boiling under his skin. Jumping to his feet, he bit through the pad of his thumb with a sharp tooth, made the necessary hand seals, and slapped down his right hand. Kuchios no Jutsu. Black seal marks spread from under his palm, there was a puff of white smoke. He shot upwards so fast he stumbled and almost fell off. When the smoke cleared, he was sprawled on the broad, red-brown, warty head of a toad so massive it loomed over the nearby trees. Naruto felt weak and kinda wobbly, but his feeling of triumph overshadowed it all. All right. He cheered, staggering to his feet and jumping up and down. I did it. What? The huge toad grumbled and glanced around in confusion. How did I get here? I summoned you, of course. Naruto laughed. The toad tossed his head and the boy wailed as he found himself thrown. He managed to catch hold of the clay pipe that dangled from the corner of the huge amphibian's wide mouth. And Naruto found himself under the intense scrutiny of a different kind of animal eye. Who are you? I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I've signed the toad contract. He declared. After staring down the king of demons, dealing with a cranky old toad was no sweat. Have you now? The toad sneered, thoroughly unimpressed. I am Gamabunta, chief of my clan. I will not fight for just anyone, signing the contract is not enough. Pass my test and prove your worth to me. Naruto's high of success wavered and started to fade a bit. Your test? He frowned and hopped up to balance on the stem of Gamabunta's pipe. Bring it on. Bold words, the toad croaked. We shall see how defiant you are after my test, if you can even complete it. You'd better hold on tight, because if you fall and touch the ground even once before the sun sinks behind the horizon, you will fail. It was still early in the day, and the summer sun stayed long in the sky. He doubted there would be any breaks, so no lunch and no dinner. And somehow, he didn't think the toad was just going to sit still and try his patience as a test. But there was no way that Naruto was going to back down. He was going to prove to this cranky old toad that he was a ninja to be reckoned with.
Scowling in determination, he leapt off the pipe, bounced on Gamabunta's head, and slid down his back to cling to the collar of his blue vest.
Let's do this.
And then Gamabunta lunged upwards so hard that Naruto thought his arms were going to pop out of their sockets. The huge toad seemed to hang in the air for a second high above the forest before plummeting back to earth with a dizzying flip thrown in. As soon as his webbed feet touched earth, Gamabunta was off again, racing along the ground in massive leaps and taking as many sharp turns as possible, doing his absolute best to dislodge the genin clinging to his clothing. Then the toad spotted a nearby lake and jumped for it.
Stupid Erosenin! You didn't tell me that I had to do this. When this test is over, I'm gonna kick your stupid, pervy ass. And then I'm telling Mom on you. Arg. Ker splash. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.